One second.
Ooh, oh. Hi, good morning, and thank you for joining the McKellar Library for today's seminar titled Natural Edge Shorelines. My name is Lynn. I am the assistant librarian here at the McKellar Public Library. I'll be your host today, and there will be a Q&A after the presentation. Our guest speaker today is Calvin Blewitt. Calvin is the Natural Edge Restoration Technician at Watersheds Canada, working with landowners, lake associations, and community groups to deliver the Natural Edge program. Calvin has worked in the environmental sector since 2018 and holds a degree in environmental studies, as well as a graduate certificate in restoration ecology. We are grateful to the Lake Manitowoc Community Association, as well as the Lake Stewardship and Environmental Committee for co-sponsoring today's seminar. So welcome to McKellar, Calvin, and thank you very much for speaking with us today. I'm going to hand things over to you now, and we'll have a Q&A after.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, Lynn. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Talk about naturalizing your shoreline, the benefits of that, and then how you can do it yourself. So first off, what is Watersheds Canada? We're based out of Perth, which is just west of Ottawa, about an hour west of Ottawa. And we develop and deliver programs, including the Natural Edge program, which I help to deliver across Eastern Ontario. We also have a number of partners across the country that deliver our programs as well. So I'll get into a bit more of it later on, but the Natural Edge program, which I help to deliver, is a program that focuses on shoreline naturalization and restoration. So we work with landowners as well as different communities and organizations to make that happen. And yeah, hopefully you learn a bit more about our organization too throughout the presentation. So first off, the components of a shoreline. There's four main components. The first one being the upland zone. So that's what it sounds like. It's a zone located at the top of a shoreline, directly above your floodplain. And it's usually where you find a place of residence or a dwelling, such as a cottage or a house. In a naturalized area or setting, you'd have usually large forests, just because it's a bit more drier, so they can support larger vegetation. Further down, you have the riparian zone, which is a bit more wet. It's more susceptible to erosion from wave action and flooding. And once again, in a naturalized setting, you have more water-loving trees and shrubs growing there too. Further below, you have the shoreline zone, which is the dividing line between your shorelands and your water body. And then the last one is your littoral zone, which isn't talked about as much, but I'd say it's one of the most important pieces to your shoreline. It starts at your shoreline and it works its way into your water body until sunlight can no longer penetrate the water column and it can no longer hit the substrate. So because of the littoral zone, I guess, getting a lot of sunlight and UV, it hosts lots of life. It hosts lots of plant life. And because of that, there's lots of oxygen in the littoral zone, and it can support a number of different fish species as well. Also, because it's so close to your shoreline, people love to swim in it, and often you'll have boats docked here as well. So it's a really important zone for a number of different reasons. So naturalized shoreline. So we have a picture here of a really nice example of one. They're still somewhat common throughout central and northern Ontario, but they are becoming less common. You can see in this picture that it has vegetation throughout the shoreline and further back, and it offers great shade for the littoral zone. And you can also see there's some aquatic plants growing on the right-hand side as well. Excuse me. And then this is a developed shoreline. So this is quite common on lakes close to urban centers. Um, it's quite common on some lakes in the Muskokas as well. And you can see there's lots of hard surfaces, um, lots of buildings. The riparian zone is mostly just mowed lawn. Um, so why naturalize your shoreline? There's many benefits. First one being it helps to reduce erosion, specifically water body based erosion. So I'll differentiate between the two types of erosion in this slide and the next one. But the first one is water body based erosion. So that's mostly caused by wave action or just general wave interactions with your shoreline. Um, and you can see that, especially on the right-hand side, there's lots of erosion taking place on this shoreline. And you can see also there's not very much vegetation at all. There's no roots being helping to hold that soil in place. And you can see on the left-hand side just the differences between roots, between different plants. So you have a native shrub on the left portion of that picture. The shrub has very deep and complex root systems, whereas the ornamental grass on the right side is very shallow and it doesn't offer the same amount of soil retention as that shrub would. So it's really important to hold that shoreline in, and you can see once again in that right picture that the shoreline is slowly being eroded and it's encroaching on that person's property. Secondly, naturalizing your shoreline helps to reduce water runoff. Water runoff, once again, can create erosion. It can create, land-based erosion. So when the water is running off into your water body, it can create trenches, which can exacerbate the erosion problem you might already be experiencing. And yeah, this is a great infographic. You can see on the left side the natural shoreline and just how complex and developed those roots are. And it does a great job once again of holding that soil in place. But it also helps to slow down the water runoff. So a lot of it can be it can evaporate, but also a lot of it can be absorbed too into the soil. Um, and of course, these stats are kind of arbitrary. It really depends on the site, but they're giving a percentage of 10% of the water runoff making its way into the water body, whereas the disturbed shoreline has over half of the water runoff getting into the water body. And then two, vegetation helps to filter toxins in the water runoff. Oftentimes, water runoff will pick up different chemicals and nutrients. When it's running down, maybe it'll pick up road salt off roadways. It'll pick up fertilizers, and that can all make its way into your water body. Fertilizers especially are a concern because they have high levels of phosphorus and nitrogen, which can lead to algae blooms, which is what you see in this picture on the left part of this slide. This is a picture of White Lake, which is west of Ottawa. And you can see that there is an algae bloom taking place, but it's surrounded by what looks to be a very vegetated shoreline. Um, but there are other areas of that lake that are not as naturalized. So there is still those toxins getting into the water, and the toxins and the nutrients can make its way down through a lake, and it can settle as it has here in this back bay. And really, it's the right place for an algae bloom, right? It's calm in the back bay. It's gonna be a bit warmer as well. So this can cause huge problems to your lake and and the ecology of the lake. It can create dead zones in your lake. So when algae is being consumed by bacteria in your water body, that bacteria is consuming oxygen. So it's kind of a secondary impact. So there can be dead zones in your lake, which can impact fish populations, but also algae blooms as well can be toxic to humans, and they're just an eyesore as well. Naturalizing your shoreline also helps to regulate temperatures, both on your shoreline, but also in your littoral zone as well. So as shown in the previous picture of that natural shoreline, you could see that it was providing really good shade for that littoral zone, which helps to regulate those water temperatures. That's really important for the organisms that live there. A, a lot of fish species have a very narrow, I guess, window of what they can live in, what temperatures they can live in. So many fish species have a very low tolerance for heat. Um, Also, it impacts the surface temperature on your shoreline as well. I'm sure most of you have walked on bare feet on pavement during a hot sunny day, and it's how hot that is. If you were to go to a forested area, the temperatures would be dramatically reduced. So those hard surfaces can absorb a lot of heat, and that can really impact how much you enjoy your property as well. So, naturalizing your shoreline creates habitat both on land and in the water. Riparian areas host turtle nests as well. The littoral zone once again hosts fish communities. Fish almost primarily will be spawning in those littoral zones, just because it's shallow. There's lots of oxygen, and the wave action is keeping um, the littoral zone free of any particles. And then two, fish often will develop here too in their early years. The first 1 or 2 years, um, they'll be living in those littoral zones because it's a bit more sheltered when compared to the rest of the lake. And then two, nobody likes geese, but geese love open areas. They love lawns. They have direct access to a water body. It, a naturalized shoreline would obstruct their views. They wouldn't want that. So really, just a naturalized shoreline helps to prevent congregations of geese on your property. And then two, naturalizing your shoreline really helps protect property values. I'm sure, as most of us know, people travel to cottage country or further north to get away from the city. They want to experience nature. So naturalizing your property really helps to enhance that experience, which also helps protect property values, right? So it protects your shoreline from erosion. It once you lose your part of your property from erosion, it's gone forever. It protects water quality for swimming, and it just creates more privacy as well. So you can put up big shrubs to provide privacy from your neighbors as well. And then here's a screenshot of a video. We usually will show a video if we're doing an in-person webinar. Um, they don't do as It doesn't work out as well for online webinars. Um, so for this seminar, I just took a screenshot. Um, it's a screenshot of the littoral zone below what is a disturbed shoreline. So you'd be able to see in the video the disturbed shoreline is mostly manicured grass with very few native shrubs or trees. And you can see the net result of that. First of all, the water column is very silty, lots of suspended particles in the water column. And then two, you can see the substrate, there's a lot of what looks to be sand dunes. So part of that could be natural, but it looks like too a lot of that is coming from your bank. So your bank's eroding away and it's coming to settle on your littoral zone. And because of that particulate matter, you're not getting the same amount of sunlight, which impacts plant life, which also impacts what's living here. So you're not seeing any fish here either. And then you look at this picture, it's quite the contrast. This is below a very healthy and naturalized shoreline. The water column is very clear, lots of plant growth, and then there are some minnows swimming in this area too. I'm not sure what species they are, but they do look to be minnows. And most minnows that live in lakes primarily will live in littoral zones. So once again, if you're impacting those littoral zones, you can really impact whole fish communities. So how do you naturalize your shoreline? Um, Once again, I wanted to give a base understanding um, of ecological restoration before we get into, I guess, more practical ways of restoring your shoreline. So ecological restoration is kind of the discipline that kind of guides our understanding of property naturalization. So it's a field of study that specializes in assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been either degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So it's a sliding scale, obviously. Most properties that we're working on are degraded, so they can be addressed with naturalization. Some properties need more work. They may need riprap, or they may need to, their slopes or banks need to be rebuilt. But most sites are degraded, so there's still lots of hope there. Also, I wanted to mention that we're not trying to bring your property back to how it was 200 years ago, when there was probably a very intricate ecosystem and maybe even like an old growth forest there. We're trying to put it on the same trajectory, but it's just not, I guess, realistic to have it to try to get back to where it was historically, just because of the impacts from climate change. Climate change is has changed what can grow in our areas. Invasive species also has impacted our ecosystems. And then, of course, too, human development. So you want to be able to use your property. So there's kind of a balance there as well. And then your overall aim, or our overall aim too, as practitioners, is to increase the productivity and capacity of the ecosystem to both benefit the natural world and yourself as a landowner and society as a whole. So we do the same procedure, but you first, when you first have decided that you want to plant your property, you want to choose where you want to plant. So the rule we use is the 25%, 75% rule. So basically, 75% of your property is given back to nature, where the remaining 25% is left for yourself, which may seem a bit of an imbalance, but let me assure you that you can make nature work for you. You can, once again, plant barriers to create buffers between neighbors. You can also plant shorter shrubs, so you're not reducing your sight lines as well. And then once you've decided where you want to plant, you want to determine the site characteristics. So first of all, you want to figure out soil and moisture. Soil will often just dictate moisture on your site. So what kind of soil is on your site? Is it sand, clay, or loam? Sand cannot hold as much moisture as clay can, so that kind of helps you determine that the moisture regime. But also, moisture regime is also dependent on how close you are to your water body, as well as water tables. And you can use a squeeze test if you're not really sure what to look for when it comes to soil type, and you can look that up online. It's a really easy test to determine what kind of soil you have. And then on top of that, you want to determine sun exposure. So is it a shaded site? Is it a sunny site, etc.? And then to your hardiness zone. So McKellar is in zone 4B, and your hardiness zone is based off of your growing season. So, and then once again, too, all these plants are dependent on these site characteristics. Some plants require more sunlight, plants require more moisture. It really depends. So that's why it's really important to determine your site characteristics first. And then here are some examples of native trees and shrubs that you could plant on your property. And once again, they're all native and they all have different characteristics. And they all do really well in a restoration context. And then, so you want to also choose what you want to plant. So the species I showed in the previous slide, most of them will come in either potted stock, which is the most common. You'll find them at most nurseries or native plant nurseries, but also in some cases, you can get them in bare root stock. So potted stock is more versatile in that it can be planted in the spring or the fall. The summer, you usually don't want to plant just because it gets too hot and dry. But potted stock does well because it's larger, it's more developed, so it'll establish in your property a bit quicker. Um, with bare root stock, where that comes into play is if you're planting um, during early spring or late fall, so basically right before and after your winter months, because bare root is still dormant. So it's really important to plant your bare root stock when uh, the surrounding ecosystem is still dormant, right? So at that point, the bare root isn't establishing itself yet. So you're planting in the spring, it will start establishing once it's planted a few weeks later into the late spring or summer. If it's planted in the late fall, it'll stay dormant until the following spring. And these really do well because they are smaller and they have no soil around their root mass. They do really well in shallow sites. They're just easier to plant in those shallow sites. Um, they are smaller, so you'll require more of them, but they are a bit cheaper as well compared to the potted stock. And then two, you want to plant native wildflowers. These do really well on a lot of different sites, and they attract lots of wildlife, pollinators such as butterflies, hummingbirds, and bumblebees. Um, and they still offer a lot of really good characteristics that you're looking for when you're restoring your site. And here are some good examples of species we use. Also, too, even if you do have riprap on your shoreline, we still recommend planting within the riprap if you can, or behind the riprap. Eventually, that riprap's going to fail, and at least you'll still have plants there to hold that soil in place. Um, so you can see in this picture here, a person's planting what looks like a dogwood, and they're planting looks like some a bare root stock. So bare root stock does really well here. Usually the soil is a bit more rocky and shallow, and you can still squeeze them into the riprap. And here's a great example, or a great picture, sorry, of plants growing within the riprap and also behind the riprap too. Also, you want to try to mimic the natural world. Once again, you're trying to restore your site, so you want to have it looking similar and also kind of offering the same characteristics as surrounding naturalized areas. So you want to avoid planting in rows because you'll never really find plants growing in rows in a natural setting. It just doesn't really happen. And also, don't be afraid to be mixing species together. As long as the plants are growing in their correct biome, they'll do well. So, and then here's a URL for our native plant database. So this is a free database that we offer to the public. It has hundreds of different plant species, and you can filter them out based off of your site conditions and your hardiness zones, etc. So this is a really good resource to use, and please feel free to use it. As well, you can also redirect your eavestrough downspout. So you can either redirect it into a rain barrel, so you can use that rainwater to water your gardens and your new naturalized site, or you can actually redirect the downspout into a naturalized area directly. So this is what's called a rain garden, and it's becoming more popular. It's a bit more intensive, but you can look it up online if you like. Um, and basically, the naturalized garden is being fed by your downspout, which is great. So, also, we always recommend to leave aquatic vegetation in place. I know with the progression of climate change and invasive species, a lot of lakes are becoming more vegetated, and there are some invasives popping up. But if you are concerned about an area, please contact your local conservation authority. They have great experts that really know about local invasives in your area. It's just really important not to remove them yourself, as they provide really great habitat for a number of species. Also, as I said before, please feel free to create pathways for yourself. Just please, if you can, create low impact pathways. So these are pathways that really help to reduce water runoff. Um, so you'll have vegetation on either sides of the pathway, and you can see that the pathway in this picture is meandering a bit. So that helps to slow down, first of all, the water runoff, and a lot of it will get absorbed by the surrounding vegetation. But also too, it's really important to, if you can, put mulch down. So that mulch does a really great job of absorbing that water runoff and reducing the amount of runoff getting into your water body system. And here's some really cool pictures. The one on the left is of a naturalized site, or sorry, an unnaturalized site that we were naturalizing. You can see that it's mowed. There looks to be some erosion happening uh, on the lawn there, and there's very few native species, or any species at all for that matter. So that's a picture from 2016, and then this is the naturalized site in 2019. So you can see the plants just took off. You can see on the right hand side how dense those plant communities are, and it's kind of cool to note that a lot of these plants are actually second generation or successional plants. So they're the offspring of the original plants we planted. So it's really become a self-sustainable site or self-sustaining site. Um, and you can see on the left, the landowner is still mowing his lawn, but he's leaving a nice buffer. Here's some more examples. So the one on the left are some plants growing behind riprap, and then the one on the right is two properties. So you have the property line is the creek itself. So the one landowner opted out of plant and naturalizing his property. The landowner on the right did plant their property. Um, and it's hard to see in the picture because it is kind of blurry, but there is a lot more erosion happening on the unnaturalized bank than the naturalized bank. So it really goes to show you the benefits of naturalizing your shoreline. And yeah, nature is flexible. You can alter it a bit so it kind of works for you. You can see that the landowner here on the left picture has opted to keep a mowed lawn behind their naturalized space, which is completely fine. The naturalized space is still offering all those benefits that you'd want. And then the one on the right is it's more of a traditional naturalized setting. So the nature's just kind of taking off around the, the cottage, which is cool to see as well. And yeah, restoration is still important even if you're not near or on a shoreline. It provides habitat and a food source for terrestrial organisms such as birds. Many birds will feed off of berries that are being grown on shrubs or trees. Mammals as well require this food sources like bears or moose or a lot of other different animals as well. And then two, once again, it helps to hold the vital topsoil in the ground. Topsoil is so important to your ecosystem. It provides those nutrients for your plants. And of course, those plants are also adding mulch, natural mulch to the ground as well. And then two, as talked about in the previous slide, naturalizing your shoreline can help to moderate the local climate. So it can reduce those hot temperatures in the summer, and then it also can help to, reduce those extreme winter temperatures in the winter as well at a local level. And then, of course, it helps to sequester CO2 from the atmosphere. It's just really amazing how even a small plant community can absorb so much CO2. So what do we do at Natural Edge? Very similar to what I laid out before. We'll get an inquiry from a concerned landowner or an organization. We'll show up on site, determine if it is unnaturalized or if there is erosion or other issues taking place. And then we'll determine with the landowner where we want to naturalize. We'll take photos, measurements, and notes. And then while working with the landowner, we'll be using our iPad app to create a planting plan. So basically, we'll have the pictures, and then we'll overlay those pictures with our site plans. So basically where the species will go on the picture on the site and what type as well. And then two, you also have the option to either plant the plants yourself, or we can plant them for you. And then here are some resources we have. I've asked Lynn if you'd like to access these resources, you can contact her and she'll have the links to them. As well, if you can also just access our Natural Edge website. So that's just naturaledge.ca, and all these guides are listed there as well. And thanks so much for listening to me today. I really appreciated this time, and yeah, I'm open to any questions as well. I also wanted to mention that currently the McKellar area is outside of our traditional delivery zone. It's also out of the zone of any of our partners. But I have told Lynn that if there is a lot of interest in our program, so just please contact me, and if I get enough interest, we can make it happen, and I can do some site visits in the area as well. So thanks so much, and yeah, I'll take any questions.
Thanks so much, Kelvin. That was awesome. And definitely, if anybody has any questions that or requires more information, just contact the library, and we'd be more than happy to connect you up with Watersheds. So
Great.
We thank you all for attending and joining in for today's very informative seminar. And thanks again, Calvin. We really appreciate it.
No problem. My pleasure.
We'll say goodbye to everybody. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Calvin, just make me host again.